listening to C-Suite Unplugged, a podcast by the Business Council of Alberta, where the province's top executives share their career story, what's happening at their companies, and speak candidly about the most pressing business issues. I'm your host, Adam Legge, and in each episode, I sit down with Alberta's leading CEOs, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders to explore their path to the top and what they're focused on right now. Enjoy the show. Today's guest and the company he leads is truly the model for the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, or CUSMA, as we call it here in Canada. Operating in all three countries, he has a unique perspective on investment attractiveness across these three countries and the ability to get major projects approved, built, and financed. He's been heavily involved in the reshaping of the U.S. regulatory landscape as a prolific commentator and champion of competitive investment climate and sound, reasonable, and practical energy and climate policy. In this episode of C-Suite Unplugged, I'm joined by François Poirier, President and Chief Executive Officer of TC Energy. François has led TC Energy since 2021, following a progression through several senior roles with the company, including Chief Operating Officer of Power and Storage. Over his tenure, he's championed strategic initiatives and major projects, including the spin-off of the company's liquids pipelines business and the launch of Coastal GasLink. He was recently awarded Business Leader of the Year for 2026 by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Our conversation gets into François' career and leadership journey, how TC Energy has evolved over the years, how François is thinking about today's energy landscape, and why natural gas and energy infrastructure is playing a bigger role in the economy than many people realize. François, welcome to the podcast.
I'm glad to be here, Adam. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for making time. I know how busy you are working in Canada, the United States, and Mexico, so it's a privilege to have you here in BCA headquarters to have a great conversation.
I love the focus of the organization, and I'm only too happy to help.
Well, thank you so much. Well, we're going to cover a host of territory, including your story and TC Energy, and then some of the issues of the industry. But let's start with your story. One of the magic parts of this podcast is people love to hear the story of a CEO. They think they're mythical creatures, but many aspire to be a CEO one day. So let's maybe talk a little bit about your journey. And so, François, why don't we start? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Ottawa in Ontario, and I did my high school in Ottawa, and as well as my undergraduate degree. Mm-hmm. I have a degree in industrial engineering from the University of Ottawa. I spent my summers working on Parliament Hill, so I got a little bit of flavor for the game of politics, and spent some time working in IT for what is today Accenture.
Oh, interesting.
And then went back to school to do my MBA in finance, and I ended up working for one of the predecessor organizations to what today is JP Morgan. Mm-hmm. And that's how I got into working with energy companies and the energy infrastructure business.
Yeah. What was that very first job that garnered a paycheck for you, François? Was it one of those classic paper route or something different?
Well, so I was a competitive junior tennis player at the national level. So my tennis coach ran summer programs for kids during the summer when they're not in school. And so they needed, young people to help run the program. So I worked sort of a Monday to Friday, 9 to 3 at a tennis camp at the Ottawa Athletic Club. That was my first job.
Oh, fun. And today, do you still play tennis?
A little bit. It was a little bit of a job for me from the age of 12 until I was about 19 years of age. So I don't play that much anymore, but it's always fun to get out there.
Yeah. And so going from an engineering undergraduate to finance in terms of what made you make that switch from more of the technical side to more of the financial side?
Well, industrial engineering is really a combination of math and business. So about half of my classes were actually in the commerce faculty, and then the other half were in math and engineering faculties. So that was interesting. And of course, that brought me to working in IT for Accenture, and I worked on business process reengineering. So how to optimize warehouses and productivity improvements in manufacturing processes. Then I ended up doing some work for a financial services organization. We did a 5-year technology plan, and I thought, wow, this is a really interesting industry, an interesting business. And it ended up taking me back to business school to learn finance.
And when you went to JP Morgan, was it intentional to go into more of an energy area, or Did you migrate there, and what was the journey from there to TC?
Yeah, it's amazing how many choices are made for you at times when you think about your arc and your career. I'd aspired to work in financial services, and of course, so that brought me to JP Morgan. I spent a couple of years supporting the person leading the forest products industry coverage. And then one day, the bank president called me into his office and said, "Congratulations, I'm promoting you to cover an industry sector that we've never covered, which is utilities and pipelines." And I remember thinking to myself at the time, gosh, what a boring industry. And nothing ever happens there. Boy, was I ever wrong. Exactly. Was I ever wrong? So it was the best decision that was made for me in my life. And, serendipitous in that it led me down a path of 20 plus years of working with some of the very best energy infrastructure companies in North America, and then traveling around to other continents to meet other companies who had interest in investing in North America. TC Energy became one of my very best clients. And so I had a long relationship with the company before I joined as a member of the leadership team.
And were you in Toronto, or is that where you're based with JP Morgan, or were you here in Alberta? Or?
So with JP Morgan, I spent about half my time, or 10 years or so, in Toronto, and then the other half in New York.
Yes.
And so the last 3 or 4 years I was in New York, I ran the global energy infrastructure practice.
Oh, wow.
Which is what brought me to other parts of the world to serve our clients. And then made my way back to Toronto after about 20 years with the company. And that's when the phone rang and Russ Gerling said, "François, would you ever be interested in coming to work for one of your clients, i.e. TC Energy?" And back then, and I think it's still the case today, when you're a service provider, a company doesn't have to treat you with respect or treat you fairly. It's your job to win business, no matter how they treat you. Right. But TC Energy always treated their service providers fairly and respectfully. And I think that's a sign of character. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to think that it's something that's carried through to today in terms of how we deal with third parties. And it's always a company I admired from the outside. And I would say my admiration for the company only grew once I came into the company.
Yeah. Was that a tough decision to leave JP Morgan? Obviously, you'd been there for quite a number of years. And was it a hell yes decision to go to TC, or was it a bit of a more complex decision?
Well, it was interesting. And for clarity, about 2 years before I came to TC, I actually moved over to Wells Fargo Securities, actually as the founding CEO of Wells Fargo Securities Canada. When Russ called, he said, "I don't really have the perfect job for you to come in to, but once you're in, we're going to move you around," which turned out to be very much the case. But my assignment when I came in was as president of Energy East.
Oh.
And boy, did we learn something about some of the skills that we needed to develop if we were going to be successful in energy infrastructure going forward.
Yeah. And you've taken that and applied it all across all 3 countries that you operate in now.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, and made it even stronger. François, all of us have career moments or people that influence our trajectories. Sound like, as you were saying, JP Morgan, one of those was made for you. But are there any moments or people that stand out in your career?
Yes, and I'd say my father, who's passed away 6 years ago now. But my father was a great influence on me, and he wasn't a businessman, he was an academic. But he taught me always conduct myself in accordance with my personal values. The saying he shared with me that I always remembered is, "A clear conscience is the softest pillow."
Isn't that true? Yeah.
And I've learned, of course, with experience that he was right. Mm-hmm. The second thing he told me, and it's not a values thing, but I remember being approached for a job to go work for one of my clients. This is much earlier than I ended up moving over. He said, "I've only got one question for you, François. Are you scared?" And I said, "No, I'm not scared. I can do this job." I thought that's the answer he wanted.
Right.
And he said, "Well, don't do it then." And I looked a little perplexed, and he said, "Until you're 50, don't take a job unless you're scared witless." And he didn't say witless.
Yeah.
You know what he said.
But it rhymes with witless.
Yes, it rhymes with witless. But it was a great lesson in getting out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
As I like to put it to people, the only way to dig a well deeper is to scrape the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So those two things stayed with me ever since then.
Yeah. There's something about a bit of the butterflies in the stomach that kind of keeps you at your best, I think. Right?
Absolutely.
It enables you to kind of push past. You're not complacent.
Yeah.
You're not thinking, oh, I've been there, done that. Don't worry, I got this, kind of hold my beer sort of kind of thing. So I think it's important to have those things that really kind of keep you pushing and trying. Yeah.
Yeah. And people often ask me, what's the formula to become a CEO? And there is no formula.
Yeah,
I hate to break it to people. There's an awful lot of luck involved in terms of being at the right place at the right time. Now, you do have to take advantage of opportunities that present themselves. But the advice I would give people to have a successful career is to always be learning.
Mm-hmm.
I read something recently last week in the Globe and Mail that said, in severe volatility, it's the learners that will inherit the future.
Mm.
And we talk a lot at TC Energy about learning. In fact, we reformulated our values a year and a half ago as part of a culture refresh.
Yeah.
And this was done not by the senior leaders of the company. It was done within the core and the heart of the company. Everyone had a say in what we put together. And one of our 4 values is active learning. And
That's awesome.
there are all kinds of corollary benefits that come from that being a value in the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. Learning is I never want to stop learning myself, right? But yeah.
It's what gets me out of bed in the morning. I mean, I've been working for almost 40 years now.
Mm.
And I still love getting up and going to work because every day I want to learn something new.
Yeah. When you aren't at the office and you aren't running TC Energy, what will people find you doing? What are some of your hobbies and interests that you do outside of the office?
Well, I'm a big proponent of physical fitness and exercise and the benefits for mental wellness.
Mm-hmm.
Until about a year and a half ago when I had surgery on my lower back, I did a lot of long distance running. I've run 12 marathons. I've done a few full Ironman distance triathlons. Now I still cycle a great deal. I like to swim and I like to play golf. And of course, I'm an avid reader. Because I'm not a great sleeper at times, I read every night when I go to bed. And if I wake up in the night, I'll pick up a book. And so I managed to get my way through almost a book a week.
Oh, wow. That's impressive.
Yeah.
That's impressive. I think I'm at about every 2 weeks on average, but that's any reads of recent that you would recommend to people?
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now called The Art of Learning. It's, I'm sorry, I don't recall the author, but it's a boy who was a phenom at chess. His father wrote a book called Searching for Bobby Fischer, which was made into a movie.
Yeah,
right?
I know that one.
Well, the prodigy in the movie is the boy of the author who now wrote this book, The Art of Learning. And he gave up competitive chess in his early 20s and became a world Tai Chi champion.
Right. Yeah.
And the point of the story was that there are a lot of things in the process of learning that are transportable from one skill that is very different to another one, being chess and then martial arts. And so I found that one to be quite interesting.
Yeah. I think I remember I've heard about this person, the bit of a polymath, kind of takes expertise and applies it.
Yes.
And becomes another expert in all these other fields.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Excellent. Well, let's pivot to TC. So for those listeners who may not be totally familiar with the company, tell us, what does TC Energy do and where do you operate?
So TC Energy transports natural gas across all 3 countries in North America. It's long-haul transportation across interprovincial boundaries, across 38 states in the United States and about 13 of 40 states in Mexico. Oh, wow. We have over 90,000 kilometers of pipelines.
Wow.
In all 3 jurisdictions. We transport about 80% of the natural gas in Canada, 30% of the natural gas from the Appalachian Basin in the U.S. To markets all over the U.S. and to Tidewater, and then about a third of the natural gas in Mexico. That makes up about 90% of our income. The other 10% comes from our power business. About 80% of that 10% comes from our interest in Bruce Power, the largest operating nuclear plant in the world. It's been a wonderful business. There hasn't been the need for a renaissance in nuclear in Ontario. It's always been front and center, but it's gratifying to see a renaissance globally in nuclear because it's a technology that is well suited to balancing reliability, affordability, and sustainability.
Yeah.
So we're glad to be in those two businesses. Both are growing at a very rapid clip. It's created some nice tailwinds for us.
And the power business is exclusively in Ontario?
We have also some cogeneration facilities in Alberta where we provide the steam and electricity to some of the oil sands facilities. And we also have a cogen facility in New Brunswick that provides steam and power to Irving and their refinery, as well as an asset in Quebec providing capacity and energy to Hydro-Quebec as well.
Yeah. It's been a little over a year since the spin-off of the liquids business. Is there still some lingering confusion in the market? People still asking if you're going to complete KXL, for example, or you push them off to South Bow? Yeah.
Well, we pushed them off to South Bow. It's proven to be a really good decision to allow South Bow to protect its competitive advantage by providing our liquids business with its own mind and management and access to the capital markets. Yes, it's not surprising that at the time that the trade tensions began between the US and Canada, we got a lot of questions around whether or not we would be interested in re-entering the liquids business. The rationale for us doing the spin in the first place was because there was so much growth in gas and power that we didn't have any capital to devote to the liquids business.
Yeah.
And that remains true today. So there's no impetus or desire for us to re-enter crude oil transportation. But I am, in many ways, an interested observer now. So I get a lot of inbounds from policymakers and industry observers to get my perspective on things, given that we understand that business very well, but we're no longer conflicted because we don't have skin in that game.
Yeah, absolutely. François, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about your industry? Are there things that you find yourself repeating time and time again, just about what people think about pipeline infrastructure, natural gas, and storage?
Well, I would say the level of energy literacy writ large across North American society is very low. We're oftentimes trying to help people understand how much we contribute to society. I often say to our employees that, unfortunately, when we do our job well, no one notices.
Yeah, isn't that true?
Yeah, because, if natural gas is delivered to your home reliably, you just take it for granted.
Yeah.
So in many instances, our job is to help people understand that natural gas, in particular, is the fuel type that will do the best job of balancing reliability, affordability, and sustainability, given that its emissions footprint is markedly lower than either coal or oil. Both coal and oil consumption have grown over the decades, and I expect that to continue to happen. I simply feel that natural gas, many people view as a transition fuel, and it really isn't. Natural gas will be the backbone of economic growth in North America for many, many decades to come.
Yeah, it is remarkable how dependent we are as a society on all forms of energy, and yet the literacy, to your point, is so low. I wonder where we kind of miss that in even primary education, and just the fundamental systems of civilization, whether it's everything from how important steel is for construction to how important natural gas is in energy. It's I reflect on that and just find that just shocking that we have got to that place where it's just an assumption.
Yeah, and unfortunately, sometimes it takes armed conflict like Ukraine or the Middle East to remind people of the importance and the role that energy plays in our daily lives. I would say that when Russia invaded Ukraine, and the risk of natural gas being cut off by Russia to Western Europe really underscored the reliance that Western Europe had on Russian gas. And, they've been working very diligently since then to reduce that dependency and to diversify their sources of supply. And I'd say two things that those countries have learned since then. Number one is how prevalent energy is in our daily lives. It literally touches everything we do and everything we touch. I found it interesting that when Russia cut off supplies of natural gas to Western Europe, it amounted to about a 2% reduction in global supply. Mm-hmm. And yet the price of LNG rose tenfold. It goes to show you how tight supply and demand is for the commodity. Secondly, the illusion that energy transition is a 5-year process. And that's been a very handy talking point for politicians in various different marketplaces. But the reality is that it takes decades to transition from one fuel type to another. Mm-hmm. And the transitions that have happened in the past, from wood to coal, from coal to oil, and from oil to natural gas as being the dominant form of energy, was driven by economic signals. It was simply a more energy-dense commodity that could be deployed more economically. And that is not what policymakers are trying to accomplish, those who are still focused on energy transition. Yeah. They're trying to force it into a couple of decade time frame without the economic signals, because renewable forms of energy are not as energy dense as natural gas, crude oil, and coal, of course.
Yeah, one of my biggest frustrations with some of we're turning a bit of a corner in Canada, I think, to some degree, but some of the previous government's view was to try and convince Canadians, don't worry, this won't cost anymore. You can have abundant renewable energy with no emissions and no cost, and you can do things easy, cheaper, fast. You can't have all three. You can only pick two.
Yeah.
And they tried to convince Canadians you could have all three, but you just can't. And I'm glad that some more common sense is prevailing in some of the public policy. We've seen unwinding of things like emissions caps and at least a suspension of EV standards and other sorts of things that I think over time will be more a pragmatic sensed approach to public policy?
Yeah, I would say certainly when you look over the last 15 years or so, it's been some time in North America since we had alignment on energy policy in all three countries, mm-hmm. where all three countries want to develop energy infrastructure at an accelerated pace. Now, they have different reasons for it. Canada to reduce its reliance on selling its oil and gas to the U.S. The U.S. has an energy dominance agenda, mm-hmm. and Mexico has an economic growth agenda through Plan Mexico 2030, which aims to attract foreign investment. But that alignment we haven't seen in quite some time. And when you couple that with very strong fundamentals, energy demand is growing at a very accelerated pace, compared to historical rates. Now we just need to execute. And that, I think, is the challenge that we haven't quite yet mastered.
We'll dig into that a little bit more in a minute, but we'll close kind of the TC segment by saying it seemed like 2025 was the year where we heard more from François Poirier, in the sense that you did a number of excellent interviews, particularly in U.S. media. You played a leadership role in the Build Canada Now letter and outline and advance the federal election. You chaired the report on the National Petroleum Council on permitting, and recognized by the Canadian Chamber as Business Leader of the Year, which congratulations.
Thank you.
And so what was it about 2025 that made you want to speak up and speak out a little bit more?
So a couple of reasons. I spend as much time as I can meeting with our employees, and I hold all of our employees in high regard. I especially hold our field employees in high regard. Mm-hmm. They didn't get to go home during COVID. They don't get to work from home a couple of days a week.
Yep.
And they're in harm's way every day. And when they make a mistake, serious injuries can happen. So the level of personal accountability is really high. And for many years, I would hear from employees, why aren't we doing more to defend our industry? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I felt the personal accountability to meet that challenge. And then secondly, in about an 8-month span, we had changes in federal governments in all three countries in North America. Mm-hmm. From 2024 to early 2025, we made it a strategic imperative at TC to make sure that we build constructive, positive relationships with the incoming administrations, as straight, transparent thought leaders that governments can go to for perspective and advice. And we always try and be balanced and honest. And so raising the volume on our voice publicly was part of making sure that we were part of the public discourse and hopefully educating those parts of the public and the media and other stakeholders who we felt didn't understand our industry very well.
Yeah. Felt like every time I turned around, I was seeing an excellent interview you were doing or something. So thank you for standing up and speaking on the industry and the opportunities and challenges that we have in front of us. As you look at globally at the natural gas sector, in terms of who's really in the driver's seat, who's winning, who is really lagging, and Canada is not unique in the sense of having natural gas reserves. They're all around the world. Major plays in the United States, in Middle East, Qatar, Australia. Obviously, Russia has tremendous reserves, but they're in the penalty box. But who's getting the right mix of policy and ambition and infrastructure, and where does Canada stack up in that?
I wouldn't say any country has gotten that balance perfectly, nor would I say that a country has really failed in that regard. Speaking more specifically to North America, the U.S.'s production of natural gas has ramped up exponentially over the last decade with their commercial acumen, their drive, and very strategic thinking around resource allocation. It's fit very well into the national security agenda of President Trump, the creation of his National Energy Dominance Council, turning, I think, megawatts into intelligence is the term that Secretary Wright uses. So in many respects, the U.S. has gotten it right in terms of the amount of production. They've won the race with Canada to become the largest exporter of LNG in the world. Yeah. That is a disappointment from my perspective because I felt that Canada could have been in that position. And my speech at the Toronto Club was to try and wake up Canadians around the ambition for us to become a major exporter of LNG, because the opportunity has come back around for us to play a significant role. And it's encouraging, obviously, to have LNG Canada commissioned, wood fibers under construction, phase 2 of LNG Canada is under consideration. The CLISMS project has been referred to the Major Projects Office. I actually think there's potential for even more to be done to export natural gas from Canada. My concern, however, if I'm being candid with you, Adam, is that I see a similar opportunity for us to play a major role on data centers. And I'm watching the movie unfold in the same way that the LNG movie unfolded. And that is the Americans seizing the opportunity and driving forward and really seeing a huge alignment between policymakers and the private sector, moving with urgency. My experience going to Washington is very different from my experience going to Ottawa. Policymakers are competing in the U.S. They understand that they're competing for capital, and they will do whatever it takes to attract capital into their jurisdictions, whether it's the United States generally, if you're talking to a federal policymaker or a state representative, be it a senator or a congressman or woman. It's a little bit different here in Canada, where there's more of a focus on process than outcomes, and things tend to move a little bit more slowly. I advocated in my speech in Toronto for 6-month permitting timelines in Canada. And I pointed to the fact that in Mexico, a few years ago, when we filed our application for the Southeast Gateway pipeline, which we've now commissioned and put into service, we got our approvals in 7 months. So it's possible. 2 years was the stated goal of the current government. I don't believe that that is fast enough.
I agree.
And I think the velocity of geopolitics is accelerating. The Prime Minister gave a speech at Davos, I believe it was earlier today, talking about the importance of economic sovereignty. You don't achieve economic sovereignty without being economically competitive. And that means you need to be able to compete with the United States. You need to be able to compete with Mexico. You need to be able to compete with Australia on LNG. Australia is one of the largest exporters of LNG to Asian markets. And so we need to lift ourselves up and look through the lens of global competitiveness. And that talks about cost of labor. It talks about taxation. It talks about permitting certainty and permitting timelines, which are the things that would attract capital into this country. My fear is that we're not getting enough capital coming into Canada for the opportunity that's in front of us.
I couldn't agree more. We frame that as sort of the investment climate, the investment attractiveness of the country as you map out everything from capital availability to regulatory and permitting and talent and all those sort of things. I'm going to try and weave a few things, Francois. And you spent time on the National Petroleum Council, obviously really dug deep into the United States framework, juxtaposed against something that I couldn't agree more on with you, which is Canada continually missing the boat on, we've missed it with LNG. You're previewing the data center side. I worry the same for critical minerals. At the root of it, is it a Canadian cultural thing? Is it just the nature of Canadian policymakers and legislators versus their counterparts in the US? Is it that loud and proud American ambition and Canadians are more muted and understated? Is it a combination of all of those things? Because even though things have improved, I think it almost feels like we're destined to always be middle of the pack when it comes to these global opportunities. I reflected years ago that Canada had just concluded consultations on a critical mineral strategy when the United States had built, passed, and implemented the Inflation Reduction Act, which accelerated a lot of the investments in the United States. We just don't want to run with the ball down the field to score. And what is as you reflect on your experience in the States, particularly where that ambition seems strong and intense, do we as Canadians need to just say we're fed up with being middle of the pack and push our policymakers to do better? Or is there something in the Canadian system that we just can't break past?
Yeah, what a phenomenal question. And it raises a whole bunch of issues. First of all, I gave the example of Mexico and 7 months for permitting. You can also look to Germany and their permitting, sanctioning, and building of regasification infrastructure to take LNG from other parts of the world in a year and a bit.
I know, I saw that. It was phenomenal.
From concept to in service. So we've got data points that demonstrate that where there's the political will, it's possible.
Yeah.
I chaired the U.S. National Petroleum Council's permitting reform study for the U.S. Secretary of Energy. And when you look at the issues that we identified, there are common issues with what we see in Canada. A desire for a single application and a single reviewer, a desire for clarity on timelines and rules of engagement, a desire for allowing litigation with parties who actually have standing and have a right to litigate, but not anybody and everybody.
Yeah.
So the issues actually travel well from one jurisdiction to the other. The answer, in my view, is that it's actually cultural, to your point, that there's a sense of urgency in the United States that doesn't exist in Canada. And unfortunately, and we operate very successfully in all three countries, I think there's a perception among many Canadians that Americans move fast because they cut corners. And they don't cut corners. They simply have a sense of urgency, and they find a way to deliver the outcomes they're seeking to deliver while respecting process and making sure that all steps are followed. In Canada, I would say there's more focus on the process than on the outcomes.
Yeah.
And
the truth, yeah.
And that is a very big difference. And the irony in that, or the tragedy in that, I would say, is that I believe we can stand up and compete with Americans toe-to-toe and do extremely well. And do it the right way, do it the Canadian way, where the way we work is as important as the work we're doing. What a great opportunity, what a great demonstration to the world it would be for us to accomplish great things and move as quickly as our competitors and do it in the Canadian way. It's aspirational, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, I loved what you said there about we focus more on the process than the outcome, and it feels like we feel that everyone has to have their say and give adequate time, and B, we're so afraid of upsetting anybody that you spend inordinate amount of time just trying to come up with the Goldilocks solution, and not that other solutions have challenges or problems, but still, I think we don't act with decisiveness
And that's, it's a question of leadership, frankly, in my opinion. I don't know that the railway would have gotten built across the country with the kind of processes that we have today.
No. Oh, absolutely not.
I struggle to see that ever being possible. So leadership is about doing the right thing, even if you may upset some people along the way.
Yeah.
And I like the policy direction that Canada is heading in, but changing culture takes time. We've been through a cultural journey at TC Energy. I think we've made some great progress, but we're 3 years into that process. And you just have to invest a lot of time and focus on it. And for us to expect massive cultural change in how the Canadian government operates, how well they deliver, how they interact with the private sector, what is in the hands of the government to tackle and what is should be in the hands of the private sector to tackle. These are all part of the country's culture, and it takes years to move that along. So maybe it's unfair for us to be expecting big changes as quickly as we're expecting them, but necessity is the mother of invention, and we are at a critical time where our economic sovereignty is under threat. And what better situation to create a sort of a national consensus around the need to move quickly than the circumstance we're in today.
Yeah. You spoke earlier about the execution challenges in Canada. Part of that is cultural, as you just mentioned. Part of it would be the regulatory and permitting approval process. Are there other execution challenges that companies like TC see for Canada to realize the ambition and the opportunities?
I think one thing that is a little bit challenging is we have 10% of the population of the United States. Maybe it's 12% now with all of the immigration. But in terms of the size of the economies relative to one another, and there's simply a scale advantage in the United States that Canada will never be able to overcome because of the size of the economy and the size of the population. But really, other than that, I mean, in our sector, in natural resources, we have a natural advantage. We are blessed with being endowed with, rich deposits of oil and gas and base metals and critical minerals. We have not been very effective at converting that to value. We sell our products before any kind of refining or upgrading, where a lot of the value added is created in the upgrading or refining processes. Let's do our own.
François, would the recommendations from the National Petroleum Council, could they be lifted and applied to Canada? Is it almost that comparable in terms of the issues? You rattle off a variety of them that I think are very identical here in Canada. Or are there some nuances in the United States that make it a bit different? Or could you literally take that and go to the Prime Minister and say, Prime Minister, I've done this in the United States. Here's a free set of recommendations for Canada.
Well, I've suggested to the Canadian government that they should read that report carefully, and that maybe a similar process could be undertaken in Canada. There were 10 recommendations. 9 were how to improve the existing framework, and then a 10th was dare to be great, and sort of a complete reinvention of the permitting process, almost by exception. because the rules are very clear. And if you attest that you will abide by the rules and you provide for close monitoring of a proponent's activities, things could be much more streamlined. So the principles, I think, there's almost a perfect overlap of the principles that each of the different recommendations seeks to achieve. It's a different system of government, a Republican system versus a Westminster parliamentary system.
Yeah.
And the regulatory bodies and the authorities that are conferred federally versus provincial or state are different.
Yeah.
So you'd have to make some adjustments for some of the technical differences. But the principles, as I said previously, are all around speed, clarity of rules, clarity of process, and application of the process in a reasonable way. In other words, a party that is directly impacted by a project should have the right to intervene in a review process, should have the right to litigate. But if you're not a party impacted by a project, the project is on the other side of the country, or you might be a stakeholder that's in another country altogether, why should they have a say in our permitting processes? And right now in Canada, they do.
They do, and they absolutely should not. I totally agree. There was a variety of sort of collective high-fiving at the acceleration of approvals from 5 years to 2 years under Bill C-5 and the major projects. That simply did not go far enough. And if we're going to compete for projects and for capital with the United States, and we think 2 years is an exceptional accelerated rate, we do, to your point, we need to be thinking in the span of 6 months.
And it's not just the timeline, Adam. In the Build Canada Now letters, we advocated for really addressing the underlying issues in the base legislation and regulations, as opposed to having a referral system for projects of high priority who get to bypass the existing processes that are broken, right? Yeah. Let's fix the existing processes, because where that falls short, the approach that's being taken right now, is that it won't attract the capital that's needed into the country to invest. In other words, if you're not on that list, you're likely not to get the attention needed to get the approvals. So how are you going to attract capital? Whereas if you address the fundamental flaws in the existing system, and it's applicable to every project in every industry across the entire country, that stands a better chance of attracting more capital. And I think what the government is learning with the politics of managing a caucus with, regional differences across the country is managing an exception process may take every bit as long as fixing the underlying system.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there needs to be a wholesale review and redo of Bill C-69, which is the fundamental problem in the process. Yeah. Late in the year, we saw the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding between the federal government and the Alberta government. The spotlight was really shone on a West Coast bitumen pipeline. But from your business, TC Energy, what positives or outcomes did you see that really piqued your interest from the MOU?
Well, so it's a signal from the federal government for partnering with the provinces, which I find encouraging. It's a signal from the federal government to acknowledge the importance of the extractive industries in helping Canada deal with its economic sovereignty in the near term. It's very clear that oil and gas is the most impactful near-term opportunity to help protect our economic sovereignty as a nation. From an alignment of ideology and a pragmatism standpoint, I viewed it as very positive. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, there are also, perhaps missed by some in the memorandum, initiatives around nuclear, for example. I believe there's a great opportunity for a national nuclear strategy. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, the regulator for nuclear in Canada, is one of the most respected regulators in the world. Canada has always been an active investor and operator in nuclear. And with electricity demand growing across the country, I think there's a real opportunity here for not only domestic ownership of nuclear, but why shouldn't we be manufacturing more of the reactors, in the country? Yeah, it could even be, a a replacement for whatever part of the auto sector market share gets impacted by trade. So that's also really exciting. And for us, so because we're the only investor-owned Canadian company in the nuclear business. Mm-hmm. So we do see an opportunity to spread our wings outside of Ontario. This will be over time into other provinces in the country. And from a natural gas standpoint, as I advocated for last year, we should be and could be, and I believe will be, a dominant player in LNG exports globally. And I'm not satisfied with being number 5, which I heard as a happy place for us to aspire to. Yeah. There's no reason why we can't be number 1, at least in terms of serving Asian markets, because we have sort of a locational advantage.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. 2026 is an important year for the CUSMA or USMCA, depending upon what side of the border you're on. Yep. You are clearly the model for business across all 3 countries. What are you watching for, and what are you? Obviously, I assume hope to remain CUSMA to remain largely intact, but are there certain things you're watching for specifically as that plays out?
Well, speaking as the leader of an energy company that moves energy across borders, mm-hmm. I want to make sure that there continues to be the free and unfettered flow of energy between Canada and the U.S. and between the U.S. and Mexico. Mm-hmm. That is what is built into the USMCA. That is what the physical flows of energy actually demonstrate. And I expect that whatever form USMCA takes, that will continue to be the case. But that's what I'm watching for, just to make sure that the flow of energy will continue freely between all 3 countries. And I think all 3 countries understand the value of having liquidity, if you will, in availability of energy between borders. Interestingly, more energy flows back and forth across the U.S.-Canada border than any other border in the world. Mm-hmm. U.S.-Mexico is growing quite rapidly. So it's difficult to say what will ultimately happen later this year. My own personal expectation is that some version of the USMCA agreement will survive as sort of a base document, but there will be sector-specific overlays, if you will, between Canada and the US and the US and Mexico, because the challenges on trade are not uniform across all 3 countries. So it's difficult for a single agreement to address all of those issues.
Yeah. And for your business, I mean, I've spoken to many people in the States, and the notion of energy dominance in the States, when I questioned about that, the response is typically, well, we don't mean U.S. alone. And Canada has such an integral integration with the U.S. energy system. So,
yes. Well, you look at natural gas into the Pacific Northwest, predominantly comes from Canada. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's 4 million barrels a day that flow from the Western Canadian Basin into the Midwest and Gulf Coast markets. And actually, you have some U.S. gas from the Appalachian flowing back up into Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes. So, and electricity there's even more, bidirectional flow of energy as well. So, energy knows no borders, and it behooves us to keep it that way.
Yeah, totally agree. François, as we move to close, any exciting things on the horizon for TC Energy you want to leave us with at all?
I would say we've focused over the last 3 years on improving our execution excellence, and I think we've executed extremely well. In 2025, we put over $8 billion of assets into service on time and about 14% below budget. And we're preparing ourselves because we think the opportunities for us to invest and deploy capital in North America are actually going to accelerate.
Excellent.
And I would love for us to continue to be a dominant player in the North American landscape. And I think we will achieve that.
I have no doubt that you will. And last question for you, François, what makes you optimistic about the future for Alberta and for Canada?
At the end of the day, I think competitiveness will always win. Whether it happens in the near term or the medium term, sometimes politics get in the way. But the Western Canadian Basin is extremely cost competitive. It is the least harvested of the major basins in North America. And when you look at major U.S. players all starting to acquire acreage in the Montney and in other parts of Alberta, it tells you that they see maturity coming in their own basins in the U.S.
Yeah.
And the U.S. is going to need Canadian gas again. And it's not that far off into the future. So I'm quite optimistic for the future of our country and of the province. I'm a new Albertan. I've lived here for 11 years. I'm never leaving. I love the province. It is a true meritocracy. It is a place where business can get done, great things can happen. The culture of the provincial government and the private sector is much more collaborative here than any other province in the country, in my opinion. Things bode very well for Alberta, in my opinion.
What a great way to end, François. Thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership in Alberta and Canada and across North America, and for joining us on the podcast today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Adam.
You've been listening to C-Suite Unplugged. As always, it's a privilege to spend some time with the leading executives of our membership. Thank you to our guests this month for sharing their journey and insights. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to review and share the podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time with more unfiltered leadership stories from the C-Suite.